Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. No matter where you go in the world, cars kind of all look similar to one another. Even with the recent EV boom and stagnation, which has created hundreds of new startups, the variation from one car to another is minimal, all things considered. Now, I know people who are really into cars will say, no, that's not true. There are big differences between one vehicle to another. And I guess it's all about context, right? But what is objectively true is that supply chains for these car companies have grown increasingly consolidated. The technology is getting a lot more mature, and there's also just less and less room for innovation and bold ideas. Especially when you compare the diversity between different car designs to the diversity of starfighters in the Star Wars galaxy. It's not really comparable. I mean, you just have so many different types of manufacturers, ranging from massive Xeno hive mind industrial companies to planet-wide shipyards to tiny boutique shipbuilders which focus on proprietary technology and crazy designs. In Star Wars, the design of a starship is extremely important because it really reflects the culture, the politics, the mentality of the faction that it belongs to. Or at least that's what Thrawn would tell you. For instance, you have companies like Incom Corporation and Carillion Engineering who go for more boxy and angular designs that are reminiscent of fighter jets and box freighters here on Earth. That is their defining look, aesthetically speaking. The more rough edges and pieced-together look on these ships suit the Rebellion's more ragtag nature. But then you have the Rebellion's capital ships, which mostly come from Mon Cala. These are more organic and smooth-looking vessels, reminiscent somewhat of a more refined time in galactic history. Which is also fitting because this organization did start out as the Alliance to Restore the Republic, and these Mon Calamari cruisers, well, there's something you would have seen quite frequently during the Old Republic period. On the opposite side of the conflict, you have the Empire, which features the most brutal and aggressive designs, reflecting the authoritarian nature of the Empire and its military-first economic policies. These ships aren't just designed to be deadly, they're designed to instill fear into the hearts of the Empire's enemies. This form over function in design of Imperial ships also leaves them quite vulnerable, especially to smaller and more nimble ships. There's an analogy to be made here, something about the Empire not caring about the little man. The average Imperial citizen who might not have much of a voice or power by themselves, but when they revolt in mass, they can bring down the entire Empire. Then we have the Galactic Republic, or Grand Army of the Republic. The interesting thing here is a lot of people assume that their designs are actually a lot more modern than the Empire. The explanation for this is that the Imperial period is a period of backsliding, not only political backsliding of individual rights, but a backsliding when it comes to the sciences and to the arts. And you don't really understand this until you see the High Republic period, long considered the golden age of the Republic, and only very recently brought into canon by Lucasfilm. I know a lot of people don't like this period of time, and I admittedly, have tried to read a lot of books and comics of this period, but I can never really get into it. But it wasn't because, the writing was poor or anything, it was more that just I like grander conflict. I'm not really interested in the Jedi just going around in a relatively peaceful galaxy. I mean, the Marauders were, they were kind of dangerous for sure. But more importantly, it actually makes sense that such a period like the High Republic would have existed, especially when you consider even in Legends, from the Battle of Rusan to the Battle of Geonosis, there was more than 1,000 years with no major galactic conflict. The High Republic was extreme. It was as extreme as the Empire was. Instead of authoritarianism, it had mass representation. Instead of excessive spending on the military, they spent a lot on the humanities, on art and culture. And so the designs of the ships of this era, the cities, are all aesthetically very enlightened and gilded with gold. And the designs do look quite interesting. You have ships like the Longbeam Cruiser, a slightly more clean take on the usual Republic Hammerhead design. You have the Vector Starfighter, a mosquito-like craft that is vaguely reminiscent of the V-Wing. If you take a look at these ships, they're kind of a work of art. They're streamlined, elegant, but also delicate and fragile. I can't imagine these things actually doing well in an actual war, right? They'd have to redesign these things with more armor or something. What I like about the designs from High Republic to the Empire is that they kind of all seem organic and they fit into the lore very well. There's a clear design lineage that you can trace from the High Republic to the Old Republic to the Empire. But what happens after the Empire collapses? Well, we're in that period right now, and while there are some cool designs here and there are also a lot of carbon copies, a lot of very uninspired, just kind of rip-offs of older ships. So take a look at the sequel era. You have the New Republic and Resistance, basically the descendants of the Rebel Alliance. And here are their main fighters. You have the RZ-2 A-Wing, which from a lore perspective, is great. It's an upgrade that fixes many of the previous problems that the RZ-1 A-Wing had. It was faster, and much more importantly, it was easier to fly. It didn't kill its pilots nearly as much as the original version did. But if you take a look at these two fighters side by side, well, you judge for yourself. I mean, can you even tell which one is which? Hint, the RZ-2 does feature a longer nose and fuselage. Then let's move on to the X-Wing. We go from the T-65B X-Wing to the T-70. Again, in the lore, it makes a lot of sense. This is an incremental leap in technology to a next generation of X-Wings, and they do fix a lot of the old design problems. We actually did an entire video talking about just how great the T-70 is. And even aesthetically, while it looks similar to the original X-Wing, the history of this design goes all the way back to one of Ralph McQuarrie's first concept arts of what an X-Wing should be. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, very little has changed as far as the appearance of the ship. Then we have the main bomber used by the Resistance, the BTA-NR-2 Y-Wing. And the lore reason behind this one is actually kind of stupid. Apparently the BTL-A4 variant of the Y-Wing, which was basically a field modification done by Rebel engineers of the original BTL-B Y-Wing, became so beloved that Cohen Sturgis decided to release a Y-Wing that mimics the look of the BTL-A4, as in now engine nacelles and most of the armor plating in the rear are removed as well. It's like if Honda one day said, screw it, we're going to bring back like the 5th generation of the Civic. But not only that, we're going to put a giant fart can on it, punch a hole in the catalytic converter for shits and giggles, and place a plastic body kit on it and just sell it like that stock. It just makes no sense. I don't think insurance would cover it, and it's honestly creatively bankrupt. You know, I hope fans can see right through stuff like this. If we take a look at the First Order, it's pretty much the same thing. The TIE fighter that they have does get a shield and hyperdrive, which is great, but it's still a freaking TIE fighter. Like, there's no changes to its silhouette whatsoever. Now, in all fairness, again, these designs are kind of thought out from a lore point of view, right? They do make sense, and they look great on screen. They even made a life-size model of the T-70, which I think is awesome. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's really no change here at all from the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy when it comes to starfighter designs. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Alan, that's how technology evolves in real life. It's incremental. I mean, the late World War II Spitfire looks a lot like the one that was flying when the conflict started. But the Mark I Spitfire has an engine that's almost half the power of the Mark 24, and it was much slower and had a lower operating ceiling. But the thing is, those changes took place in the span of maybe 5 to 7 years. The changes we're seeing from all original trilogy starships to sequel starships is as long as 50 years. And so, to give you a little context, 50 years after the Spitfires started flying, this is what fighters looked like. This is a jet fighter, a French Air Force Dassault Rafale. It looks completely different. I mean, there's even different propulsion methods and technology going into this thing. Star Wars gets this kind of wrong in the sequel period. I mean, take a look at the T-80 X-Wing, the latest iteration of the famous fighter. I personally just don't like this design. Aesthetically, I feel like it looks really meh. It looks like Temu an X-Wing. What they've done right here is just futurize the look of the fighter, and that's really not how technology is supposed to progress naturally, especially military hardware. It's not a form-driven process. New engines, new reactors, new weapons. These are the things that affect how starships look. What we're getting instead is more of a cosmetic uplift, like when they bought the Mustang and Camaro back in the 2010s. They look cool, for sure, but this is not what defense procurement is focused on. There's a reason why the modern main battle tank really looks nothing like a Sherman tank. The technology and doctrine are completely different now, and these new modern battle tanks are designed from the ground up for a very different mission. They're designed to be effective. They're not chasing nostalgia. And then we have the First Order fleet, which is even larger and easier to destroy than ever before. We have the 8-kilometer long Manager-class Siege Dreadnought, the 3-kilometer long Resurgent-class Star Destroyer that replaces the ISD, and of course, Snoke's monstrosity, the Supremacy, along with the moon-sized Death Star thing. You know, these ships, these designs, they're extremely important to Star Wars fans. Especially Americans, because we have like a special connection, I feel like, to vehicles. And I was talking to Congo about this the other day, about how like younger generations they want different things from their automobiles. A lot of them don't even care about driving or not, because I think it's a lot easier to get around now with Lyft and Uber. But when we were kids, driving was more than just a rite of passage. It was really like your first taste of freedom. When you got the keys to your first car, you basically unlocked the entire world. You got to get out of the tutorial zone. Not only that, you experienced a lot of special moments in that car, your first car. Like the first time you go all the way with a girl, the first time you go to a concert, the first time a police officer goes all the way with you. It's American tradition to see those blue and red lights in your rearview mirror and be terrified, right? Something we all go through. And so it's only natural for people growing up in this society to develop an unreasonably passionate love and attachment for all things with motors. It's because we associate it with so many great memories, with freedom. And so when you're making a Star Wars story, whether it's a movie, a TV show, a comic, heck, it could even be a video game or a novel, designing the ship that your characters use properly is really important. In shows like The Skeleton Crew or The Mandalorian, where you're basically following one group around as they go from one system to another, the ship is almost a character of its own. And so when you see the janky-ass Razor Crest get chewed on by a sea monster, get covered in spider guts, smashed into rocks, and dunked into a salty ocean, you feel something. And then when the poor thing gets stripped down to its bare bones, you feel anger. And when it finally gets destroyed by an orbital laser, you feel a hint of sadness along with relief. Because even though the Razor Crest wasn't the most unique or amazing looking ship, it had character. There was an effort to make this ship reflect its owner, Din Djarin. Heck, the cockpit almost looks like Mando's helmet. And like the Mandalorian, this ship could take a lot of abuse. It could take a lot of hits, but it would continue to get up. And really the only way you could stop it was by destroying it. And so when I watched the Onyx Cinder in the most recent episode of The Skeleton Crew, spoiler alert, I was filled with an immense sense of happiness when I saw this gigantic clunker of a pirate vessel metaphorically strip itself from its outer husk and turn into a beautifully sleek Corvette. Just as the crew was going through their own transformation from a bunch of scared kids to a team of, still scared kids, but kids who trusted each other's abilities and strengths and were able to finally work with each other as a crew. It's not always obvious what makes a successful movie, but when you're short of talent and inspiration, the least you can do is be meticulous in how you write the story and how you design the characters, the ships, and how you produce it. And I think with The Skeleton Crew, I've come to a realization just how important these starships are. At a minimum, I think all creators need to focus on making this one aspect of the story work. It's really the bare minimum you can do. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.